Well, alrighty then, the mower's running again, and I'll use it later to mow with. Taking it for a couple passes around the yard there, as you can see, and it seems to be doing okay. That carburetor's still real touchy on it. Sometimes it tries to run too fast, and the governor on the throttle interface is just not working like it should, but it's usable. I'm going to go ahead and pull the shroud off when it cools off again, the motor cools off, because I suspect that the fins need to be cleaned on it, blown out with the air gun, because I saw some junk fly out from under there when I revved it up real high once. And last couple times I used it, at least especially the last time, it kind of smelled a little bit hot. So down on power and things like that, it may just be wearing out finally, but we're going to do that. But what this video was about these guys. You know, I've done several videos about Quadrajets in the past, and it's been a while since I've posted those up, and I thought I would do some updated videos. And what I want to do in this video is I want to talk about Quadrajets and why that I'm a fan of them, and what I believe are their good points and bad points, and why I prefer to use them if possible, especially on an original application such as some kind of a General Motors product and the occasional Dodge. Yes, Dodges actually did come with Quadrajets for a while in the 80s. So this video is not going to be to bash a Holly or bash an Edelbrock or anything like that. I know a lot of guys like Hollies and Edelbrocks, and they're, you know, what my feeling on it is, if you like a Holly, you should use a Holly. If you like an Edelbrock, you should use an Edelbrock. But I don't. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to, like I've spent the last 4 years doing, I've tried to reverse and correct some of this this ill will towards Quadrajets and some of the mythology surrounding them, and bad information and that kind of thing. So we're going to kind of compare. We're going to talk about them. This is, like I said, this is a Holly. This is actually a kind of an unusual Holly. This is actually a Thermoquad or Quadrajet replacement made by Holly. And what makes it interesting is, although it's a Holly design and it's got just about all the Holly design characteristics, it's designed to, as you can see, now this is a straight in, but some of these Quadrajets, a lot of them actually still have the side inlet, so it's designed to have that. And what's very interesting about it for a Holly is this is a spread bore carburetor. You see that it's got the two small primaries and the large secondaries, just like this Quadrajet here has. So the main reason for that is that it will fit on a spread bore intake manifold, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, the differences in those. But these are two totally different animals in their design and in their operation. I mean, in their operation, you know, they both do the same thing. They convey gas and an air mixture into the engine so the engine runs. But as far as the way they adjust and the way they meter fuel and induct air and things like that, they're quite a bit different. And like I said, I have never used a Holly to any extent. I'm actually going to rebuild this and put this on my convertible Plymouth in the garage in there when I get ready to use that. This is a, like I said, this is a typical Holly for the most part. It's not quite as adjustable as some of them are, but it's a vacuum secondary. This is the vacuum pot back here. So let's turn these to the side, and that'll give us more of a picture of what we're looking at. Now, like I said, this is, you know, I'm not really going to get into a whole lot of theory about Hollies versus Quadrajets, and, you know, you can do some Googling if you want to understand more about that. But I'm just going to kind of compare these two and show you what you know, of course I'm a little bit biased. I like Quadrajets a whole lot, so I'm going to make an emphasis on pointing out its good points. Now, one thing you'll notice, this has a choke unit on it, and this does not. This is because these are designed for a divorce choke application, which means it has a choke bimetallic coil on the bottom, on the intake somewhere, and it has a little rod comes up and goes up and down as the coil contracts or expands. And a lot of these Plymouths, you know, Dodges and Chryslers use that. So that's what that is. So that's negligible. That's not going to enter into our discussion. One thing that I like about Quadrajets versus Hollies is you'll notice right away that these Hollies have a bolt-on fuel bowl, and this one here, this bolt-on. So not only is there a potential for leaks from that, because you always have fuel, gasket below fuel level. You know, say your fuel level runs about halfway up here in these bowls, you always have a potential for leaks there, and I don't like that. And anytime you have to go in to work on the float or something, or inside the carburetor, you've got to dump fuel out. So if it quits, if you're at the track, and there again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't use a Holly. Hollies have their place, absolutely, but anytime you have to get into this thing, you got to dump fuel out. So now that said, you know, there'll be people that say, well, it's only 4 bolts. You know, look at all this crap you got to go into. But the way I kind of look at it, you know, especially on more of a Holly that's not in a racing application, you know, meaning you don't have to go into it very often, you shouldn't have to take a carburetor apart unless you somehow get dirt in it. But that's one thing about it I don't much care about, and that's why I like the Quadrajet. Quadrajet's just got a one gasket, you can see up here at the front, between the air horn. This is the air horn here, and this is the carburetor body here, and this always stays above fuel level. Now, typically in operation they make it a little bit damp, but that's just the nature of it, because it is exposed to some fuel in here. So it will, you know, they tend to run a little bit, you'll see a little bit of dampness, but that's about it. And so it's not very common for these Quadrajets to leak. If they flood, sometimes you manage to flood if you get a stuck float or something like that. Sometimes they will drip a little bit of gas off the throttle butterfly lever. That's just because it's going down on the inside and running down outside of it. It's not common though. And one other thing I especially like about a Quadrajet versus a Holly, just about every Holly I've ever seen, except for a couple 1 barrels and 2 barrels, like goes on one of those, uses this nice external, that's the fuel accelerator pump diaphragms, and that cover right there, you got a lever coming off of it, and you know, it's called a diaphragm type of a accelerator pump. It's just basically a kind of a flat piece of rubber. It's got a spring on one side of it, and when you, let me see if I can prop this up here, convoluted way of doing it, but when you operate the throttle, you see how that lever goes in, just basically pushes on that, and that's what squirts fuel in. They work good, but the problem is when these things break, that diaphragm breaks. Think about where this carburetor's sitting. It's sitting on your engine, your hot engine, most of the time. And if that thing cracks or gets a hole in or whatever happens to it, and it starts shooting fuel out, where's it going to go? Well, right on the engine. So I do not like that. And that's the way the 1 barrel on that car is. It's the same deal, except it's inside of the carburetor, but it's got a little weep hole. They were conveniently put a weep hole so the gas will still come out on the engine. So those two things I do not like about Hollies. That's just simply a design characteristic, and I don't think it's a good design, but that's me. On the other hand, on the Quadrajet, your fuel pump, accelerator pump, I keep calling it that, this is the top of the accelerator pump rod. It's got you see a picture of it, it's got a little cup. This uses a cup style, it's like a little cup, rubber cup style accelerator pump. So you push this thing down and it goes like that, and the squirter, that's what it does. It has a passage in here, it pulls fuel out of the float bowl, and squirts it down where it's supposed to go down in the primary. So there again, the worst usually is going to happen if that thing breaks or comes apart is it's just going to quit. It's just going to get a bad tip end bar. When you give it the gas, it's just going to go over on its face temporarily because your accelerator pump quit working. That's all it does. It shouldn't ever dump fuel out on your hot engine like a Holley does. And the main thing, besides that, I guess you'd say the third thing that I'm not a fan of about Holleys and Edelbrocks, I have an Edelbrock on that car there. In the spirit of full disclosure, I am running one on that one. But the main thing I do not like about one of these type of carburetors, be it a Holley or an Edelbrock, is, and this one's the same way, and that is that these are a fixed capacity carburetor, which means that if you buy one of these, you say you buy a 600 CFM Holley or a 650 or a 700 or a 750, whatever the case may be, then that carburetor, as long as it's a carburetor and not melted down into a molten iron or steel, it's always going to be 600, 650, 625, 700, 725. So it's always going to flow. That's the maximum CFM it's ever going to flow. You cannot, unless you, well, I don't even think you can do it, but if, you know, normally you cannot ever alter the CFM of one of these carburetors, these Holleys or these Edelbrocks. So that's what I do not like about them, because if you buy a, you know, you're like a lot of these guys out here, and you've decided for yourself that you can't understand one of these, or you just like being able to tell people that you bought a Edelbrock. You know, that's just you. That's fine, but you know, if you're one of those guys that does that, and you have usually a mostly stock 350, you run out to the parts store, Advance or O'Reilly's, and you buy one of their off-the-shelf Edelbrocks, or you spend a little bit more money buying off-the-shelf Holley, and it's a 600. Well, that'll probably work fine on a stock 350, but what happens if you ever decide to put head and an intake and a bigger cam in it? Do you think that thing is still going to be able to use a 600? It might not. What happens if it isn't? What if you're flowing more air and it will not, that carburetor doesn't flow enough air anymore? Well, what are you going to do? You're stuck. You got to take that one off, sell it, and go buy another carburetor. You know, and a lot of guys tend to ignore that fact. You know, you'll see questions on the internet. People will say, well, I don't know what size would be a good CFM, a 600 or a 650 or a 700, and you got every opinion under the sun. Guys, oh, yeah, I use a 700, I use a 600, it works good. The fact is that most people that mess with cars that aren't just typical, you know, hardcore racers that know these things automatically or want to figure them up, they don't have a clue about how much CFM an engine actually requires. That small block in that Dodge over there, it probably needs about 575 to 600 CFM at max. If I held it wide open as high as it'd rev, that's probably as much as it'd pull in. Now, and that's true for a lot of engines that are not race engines. That's like, you know, a 302 Ford or a 350 Chevy. You know, you got, like I said, you got a mostly stock engine that won't rev past. Well, some of them might, but you know, we're say 5,300 RPMs a max they'll rev. And guys say, well, that thing, it's a 350, it probably needs a 700. You don't know. You can figure it up. You can get a formula on the internet, and it'll tell you how much CFM you require. So that's kind of got off on a sidetrack there. I'm sorry about that, but it's good information. You know, and these seems, you know, guys tend to, I don't know, guys tend to let people form their opinions for them. They fish around for the best opinion that sounds the best. So they don't want to listen to somebody that says, well, that engine only needs about 600 CFM. They don't want to listen to that. Well, it's a 350, it probably needs 700. So they'll fish around till they get somebody that says, oh yeah, put a 700 on it, run good. That's what they do. So anyway, what was I saying about that to start out with? That's the beauty of a Quadrajet. It's a spread bore. As you see, it's got these nice small primaries. These are the primaries. This is what it runs on most of the time when you're just, you know, part throttle cruising. And then when you kick it open, you know, there come those big secondaries open. And the beauty of this thing is that it is, because of this air door design back here, then it's a variable CFM carburetor, and that means that if this carburetor is on a 305 Chevy and it may need 525 CFM at the most, then when you punch it wide open, it's only going to flow up to whatever the engine needs. The engine CFM, the ability for it to flow air, determines how far this carburetor is going to open. So these things at the bottom, these here on the Quadrajet, even if they're wide open, if this is on a V6 and they're wide open, they don't control the metering of the fuel themselves. They're not directly connected to any kind of fuel meter. The whole thing on the secondary side on the Quadrajet, you see this little, this is called a secondary hanger. You see it's got a little cam and it raises it up. I'm going to pull those out in a minute. I'm going to show you these. We'll go ahead and do that, but that's what determines how much fuel it flows. So it's a variable CFM carburetor. It only flows as much air and as much fuel on the secondary side as the engine requires. That means if you put this on a, if you take just a normal Quadrajet, say you've got one for a 350 and you're running on a 305, it'll run good. I mean, it's it's not going to be very much more rich enough to make any difference. So if you're running on that 305 and say you go build yourself a 350, and you put some stout heads on it, stout cam, and you want to use that same carburetor, it'll be fine, because this thing will flow up to 750 CFM. So you going from using, so you're going from running 500 CFM through that 305 to, say 675 on that 350. You can pop the same carburetor on it, and it works. All because of this. So we're going to do a part 2, guys. This has been 17 minutes on this, so we're going to discuss this more.